welcome to this closing session of MIPI DevCon 2020. I hope you've enjoyed the dev so far, and we hope you're going to enjoy this session on IoT. I'm Ian Smith. I'm your moderator for today's session. Technical consultant specializing in IoT, telecommunications and cybersecurity. I've worked in the industry for 20 years, and most recently I've been working at MIPI Alliance, helping them write a white paper to explain how MIPI can enable the IoT opportunity. Kevin and I presented an overview of this paper earlier today during DevCon, so I hope you enjoyed that session. If you missed it, then please check out the recording from the website. Let me give a quick introduction to this session. We've all heard about the coming of the Internet of Things. It's been predicted for well over a decade now, and analysts are predicting billions of connected devices coming online over the next few years. What we want to do in this session, however, is really kind of delve into this market and really ascertain whether this, hype, or is this a real market that's developing with pace. So in this session, I'm really lucky. We've got some world-leading industry experts who can help reality check the IoT. So let me just quickly introduce them to you. We have Yuru Zong from GSMA Intelligence. He's lead analyst for IoT and Enterprise. She's been involved in IoT since it was called M2M back in 2008, and consulted on numerous IoT markets, including utilities, transportation, Industry 4.0. She's currently lead analyst for IoT at GSMA Intelligence, where she has specific focus on IoT market revenue sizing, security, platforms, and services. We also have Michele Scarlatella, who's director for microcontrollers at ST Microelectronics. He's been at Microelectronics since 2003, where he's had various senior positions in strategic planning and marketing. Before ST Microelectronics, Michele is co-founder of his own network security company, and has also worked in the telecoms and payment sector. He also has an esteemed academic background with numerous scientific papers to his name. And last but not least, we have Kevin Yee, who's Director of IP and Ecosystems at Samsung. He brings more than 25 years of semiconductor experience, covering roles in R&D, planning, sales, marketing. He also has a background in ASIC design and IP development. Kevin is also presently chair of the MIPI Alliance Marketing Steering Group. So a real esteemed panel of experts. So without further ado, we can crack on into our discussion. And let's first up talk about the IoT market. My first question to the panel, obviously looking towards Yuru as the first response, is to ask, what is the present state of the IoT market? Is it hype, or is it now reality?
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for the introduction. I think as an analyst that's been looking at the M2M market since the early 2000s, I think it is clear that we have been talking about this for a decade. The way that we are doing the forecast suggests that we keep having to adjust our expectations. So in the latest GSMA Intelligence forecast, we are looking at some of a reduction in both IoT connections and IoT revenue as a result of the way enterprises are looking to deploy IoT. So for 2025, for the number of connections for IoT is now 24 billion as opposed to 25 previously forecast. More importantly, in terms of the revenue, we are expecting $900 billion for 2025 as opposed to $1 trillion billion. And I think what is interesting here is to say that there is a lot more enterprise awareness. So one of the ways that we have been tracking enterprise adoption attitudes is our Enterprise in Focus survey. We've done it for 2 years now. In the latest 2019 results, we definitely have seen 65% of enterprises that we surveyed are saying IoT is part of a digital transformation agenda as opposed to a standalone hobbyist type of deployment. I think this is quite important And another evidence of data point to suggest it is getting into reality is that more than 50% of enterprises surveyed believe that IoT is transformational, and this is a 12 percentage points up from our 2018 survey.
Excellent. So it sounds like it really is, the market is developing as per the forecast. Can you give any insight on which industries are perhaps, performing strongly in this sector, really adopting IoT solutions? And then perhaps also give the converse, which industries are perhaps lagging, perhaps finding that they have some barriers to adopting this technology?
Yeah, I think in the new normal that we have seen, we definitely are expecting the industrial IoT, meaning the non-consumer facing IoT applications. And particularly, we are looking at three main verticals that would be quite growing quite fast or expected to grow fast. And these would be, as you would expect, in manufacturing, in utilities, and in retail. And the reason why we say that are twofold. One is the Enterprise in Focus survey as well. We do see that these are the three verticals that are expecting an accelerated deployment for IoT in 2020. And more importantly, I think we have all seen all the deployments or trials in the various manufacturing verticals. And what has happened with COVID as well is that we understood the urgency of having data that provides you with visibility of what you're doing, whether you're in manufacturing or just in retail, trying to actually get a sense of how I might react. And I think that is quite an important waking up point that say, actually, the data that we need, and I think you do need data from having IoT technologies. And I think from the flip side, definitely as all the consumer side of things, as we try and get back to work, trying to get back to employment, I think that would definitely have an impact on the consumer-facing IoT. So a simple thing like, are you still buying cars at this period? So I think a lot of the connected car opportunities would actually have been shelved as well.
Okay, thanks for the insight. Let's bring some of the other panelists on board. Kevin, does what Jero's kind of described there, does that tally and square with what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think initially most people who aren't in the industry, when you think of IoT, you think about the wearables. But I think what Jero said is very true. It's going to be the enterprise industrial that's going to be driving a lot of this adoption. And we are in the data era. It's about collecting data, and really IoT devices are going to be one of the primary channels that will be collecting data. So I think that's across a lot of different industries, and that we're going to be seeing a lot more IoT adoption and into all market segments. I mean, we talk about IoT and it's been used in a lot of different ways, but I think IoT is a very broad area. It's going to cover a lot of different market segments, a lot of different types of products moving forward.
Okay, Michele, anything to add from your side and what you're seeing at ST?
Yeah, well, of course, there was a big, let me say, hype on the beginning, a big expectation. So, but people were enthusiastic about it. But when you face the integration of such a complex system, then there was some, people discovered that they needed to. It wasn't so easy. I think this is what slowed down a bit. So personally, I believe that the market will grow, but there has been a stage where you had hardware guys like us needed to understand, how the cloud worked, how the enterprise applications are structured, how to connect, and vice versa. People, from the, let's say, application, large enterprise software team, they needed to understand how hardware works. So I think this has taken some time. And I think on both sides, where companies are making investments, on our side we are doing, and you also see, for example, a company like Amazon buying FreeRTOS, which is a kernel operating system, it's a real-time operating system for embedded So the two ends can be together now and get to know each other, and I think this is really the strong foundation for IoT development. And I agree with Kevin that we will see the biggest benefits are not so much from you also have a lot of consumer devices, but also on the embedded device, like smart sensors, things which monitor things, cameras, and this kind of stuff, because you really have a feedback for that. When you make investment, that will be in operational efficiency, getting the data to know your customer, your operation.
Okay, thanks, Michele. So, what I've heard so far is obviously, the IoT market, is developing. It's developing in lots of different areas, covering lots of different use cases, which is great to hear. But obviously, there are still some issues. There are always issues in any new market, developed market. Perhaps we should just delve into, some of those specific issues and find out a little bit more about them. You've done research in this space. I mean, can you talk us through any kind of specific examples where particular industries perhaps struggling or meeting up with some sort of barriers to deploying these solutions?
Yeah, I think what both Kevin and Michele have mentioned is exactly the barriers to adoption that we have discovered. So specifically, as we say that enterprises are now looking to deploy more, they are therefore facing increase in scale. And we're not even talking about the tens of thousands or millions connections. We're just looking at maybe the average size of deployments having slightly more than 500. And they are already saying that I'm facing integration problems. So between the two surveys that we've done in 2018 and 2019, we both saw an increase in scale, so a higher number of enterprises are deploying devices more than 500, but we're also seeing that the integration challenge have increased from 47% in 2018 to 53%, and I think that's quite meaningful. And specifically, right now, it is only looking at integrating with IT environments. And the whole idea of, as Kevin mentioned, IoT is so broad, it covers so many sectors, so many types of devices. The fragmentation really makes the deployment and implementation quite difficult. Where do I start? And so one of the interviews that we've conducted says simple things. If I'm running a hospital, connect a hospital, and my consultant comes in with a fancy new tablet, that is causing integration problems if you're looking at data and security protection. So I think it is as simple as just taking in a tablet, and let's not even talk about the possibility of bringing in an industrial or connected medical equipment into the domain.
I see. So, they really are sort of struggling with the technology and introducing it into sort of well-established processes and environments. So it's probably a good opportunity perhaps then to really think about, what's happening within MIPI Alliance and perhaps how MIPI Alliance is trying to address and help resolve some of these issues. It's probably a good question to ask Kevin to lead on this one is to consider, what's happening inside MIPI, and perhaps you could give us a little bit of a flavor about, what's MIPI doing to address, the key challenges we've just highlighted. Kevin.
Yeah, I think jumping off of what Yuri said is fragmentation and a transition, and actually the title you talk about, transition from hype to reality. I think whenever we go into kind of a new technology, the natural thing is to leverage existing technology and move into that. And I think that just like IoT, that's what people have done. You take, as Yuri mentioned, is you take existing hardware, existing infrastructure, and you try to move it into that industry. Like she was talking about in the medical, let's just use a tablet. And I think that was the initial stages of what IoT did. Use existing hardware, use existing software, and try to address this market. And I think that transition that you're talking about from the hype, getting that volume, the deployment, the adoption, is shifting as we start to customize it now. Now we realize we moved into this market, and we used transitionally probably the mobile market, moving into IoT the most, and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do first, take mobile market, move it into IoT. Now we're realizing that, okay, it works, but it could be better. We can do things differently. And really that's where MIPI has played, is MIPI has has gone into the mobile market and has been the de facto standard for a lot of the specifications for mobile. And what MIPI is trying to do now is to help customize that for the IoT market. Some of the tenets of MIPI that has been driving it in the past has been about giving flexibility, high performance, low power, low EMI. Those are all things that really help drive the IoT market. You know, you're talking about collecting data. Performance is just accelerating more and more, and I need to collect more data. But a lot of these devices are battery powered or low power, and they need that low power. So those are some of the key environmental things that you need within IoT. But more importantly is we're adopting our specifications. I think Michele brought up, a lot of it has to do with sensors. And MIPI has developed I3C to really drive interfaces for sensors. It's improved the performance significantly from past standards, really addressing the need for what this market's going to need. It's very low power, minimizes the I/O. So those are some of the things within MIPI, I think, that's going to help this transition from the hype to the reality. And I think we can't say hype anymore. Even from your data, we're talking about billions of systems. That's no longer hype. The question is, how effective and how efficiently can we do that? And I think one of the goals of MIPI is to help kind of standardize that, help with that fragmentation, standardize some of the interfaces for different sensors. So whether you're using sensors for a wearable product, or how you interface those sensors in a smart city or in an industrial agricultural application, that you can leverage that same sensor and the same interface across different market segments. And that is going to give you the scalability that you want. I think to really get to that reality of the billions of units and to break that fragmentation and to allow scalability, you need to standardize it so that a sensor I use for one product can be used across many others so that I can scale it. So I think that's some of the things that MIPI is trying to do right now from a standards perspective and to help in terms of the IoT market.
Excellent. You touched on some really interesting points there. Obviously, MIPI's got a whole heap of existing, mass adopted specifications out there in the marketplace, well utilized in the smartphone sector and ripe to be used in the IoT space for all the reasons that you said, for low power, simplicity, low cost, and so forth. But MIPI, I suppose, historically, is perhaps focused more towards the hardware side of things, looking at the kind of physical interfaces, the connectors. But IoT is now perhaps more moving into a bit of a software play, and needs more support from a software perspective. I mean, is MIPI kind of addressing that side of things as well?
Let me briefly talk about it, and I'm actually going to pass it to Michele because I think he's a better response to this. But yes, one of the things that MIPI is trying to do is, this is a big thing, but we've been working on things that leverage across already. Things like, and you'll see in your IoT devices by today, camera interfaces, displays, the audios. A lot of those things are being moved into IoT devices today in your smart cities, in your smart homes, and all of those things. One of the things is not just the specification itself, but putting a software framework in place, putting tools in place to address that. So I think you need a comprehensive and a wholesome solution for IoT, and that's what we're trying to put in place. But what I'll do is I'll pass it to Michele. I know that you've had some experience on the tool side and the software side for IoT.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Indeed, I going to say that I would see that the three areas I think are okay. There's lots of standards, but I think three areas I think are really important for the IoT. One was the I3C you just mentioned, camera interface, and the debug. Let me just go briefly through those. So, okay, you already the benefits of the I3C. Let me add that we, as the MIPI, we developed the host controller interface. So that's full, complete stack. That let me say standardize the access to the bus. So this is really the common framework, because there are tons of different kinds of sensors, and this could be a barrier to implementation. By having this common ground where you to the host controller interface software, which is, by the way, freely available. You don't need to be this anyone can adopt it. You don't need to become a MIPI member for that. And it has a number of interesting features, not just being freely available, but also the ability to add render extensions if you have a particular device which is not covered. I think this is really a great initiative to speed up the adoption of the I2C. The other area is the camera interface. Okay, camera, it's been probably one of the biggest success of MIPI. But for what regards the IoT, we know that the edge, AI to the edge, computer vision, recognizing objects and taking actions at the edge is becoming one of the key topics for the IoT. So, by offering the common camera interface, which is really scalable from tiny cameras to 18 gigabit, super high resolution. You can have also the region of interest. You can select a very high resolution in particular area. Think about security camera or industrial quality control, this kind of stuff, and everything can be controlled through the I2C. So I think this will be the second area, which I think it's really is going to help for the IoT. And last is the debug, okay? Because at the end you need to develop product. IoT, it's not a single chip. It's a system where you need to debug things in parallel. And I think the debug we offer it's quite complex ecosystem there, but these have been a couple of initiatives which I think are worth to mention. One is the debug over the I2C. It will be announced. There will be a webinar, I think, in October. So that means that now you don't need to put extra hardware. It's really, let me say, zero cost addition, being able to debug through the I2C interface. So standardizing that supports also parallel. So you can monitor in parallel your sensor, your MCU, or different sensor, what are they doing. I think this is because at the end, the market adoption is also defined by how long it takes you to bring a product to market. So anything that facilitates that, speeds up the time to market. And also on the debug, it's also worth to mention the system software tracing, the SIST, which is being adopted now in the Linux kernel. That means that anyone who wants to instrument some software for debug has a standard interface that is able to talk to the device on the other hand without. So I think on the debug, let's say, very vast system there. These two initiatives are really going to help on speeding up IoT devices, which are connected devices by definition. So I think there's probably other things to say, but to me these are probably the most worth initiatives that are bringing forward in MIPI.
Okay, thanks, Michele. Obviously, you've just gone through a whole raft of different technologies that the MIPI is overseeing, both hardware and software components. I just wondered if you could just give us a kind of overview of where, a developer could get started with using some of this technology. How readily available is it? How do you get started? Can you get dev kits? Perhaps you could us through, where a developer might get started.
Well, there is a number of which companies is looking forward this on kits, but let me mention the, let's say, neutral platform like the Raspberry Pi and Arduino. I'd like to mention that because those are educational platforms, so to speak. They're also adopted by smaller companies, but to me, these are educational platforms. Raspberry Pi natively offers camera and display, MIPI, CSI, and DSI interface. All models do. And the fact that education means on the long term, if you learn certain things using certain tools, this will become part of your engineering DNA, so it will be really deeply entrenched into so people will bring this background into the companies they will work with, and they will tend to adopt that because it's easier, people are well acquainted. They know if they go from one hardware platform to another, they will benefit to have the same software interface. So to me, these are very important. Of course, there are individual companies, here we don't want to do the commercial promotion of one another, but there is quite a large number of companies that are offering low entry-level kits, which already offer some of the MIPI interfaces that I mentioned. So these are quite readily available on the market, especially for the computer vision AI stuff.
Excellent. So
I don't know if
there's lots of
answered your.
No, it's a good overview, and I think as you described, there's lots of readily available kit out there to start to using some of these interfaces, right from the get-go. We're getting towards the end of the chat now. I just wanted to turn to Kevin again and just ask Kevin if perhaps Kevin give a little bit of a flavour about where MIPI's heading next and what's happening next in MIPI to support IoT.
Yeah, as I mentioned, right now IoT is a very big focus for MIPI. We're leveraging a lot of the learnings that we've had from the mold direction into the IoT. We're developing specifications with IoT in mind, so to have a good mindset of it. More importantly, as you had mentioned earlier, we've just developed a IoT white paper to help just educate and expose designers to the various resources that are available. As Michaeli talked about, is not only the specifications, things like a sensor interface or camera interface or display or audio interface, but we're looking at the software framework, to have a standardized software framework to help developers. We're looking at development platforms. We have various plug fests going on to make sure that we have interoperability. So a lot of these activities are going on to help minimize risk, to accelerate designs. But more importantly is we have the specifications available today that people are already developing to help some of that fragmentation, to help that scalability. Those are the things that MIPI is focusing on today and driving our specifications. We have many different work groups going on driving this, and a lot of different members who are driving this IoT space.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. Good overview. So we're say near the end of our session today. I think there's time just perhaps for each of you, just to give you perhaps your key takeaway. Obviously, we've got a developer audience tuning into this event. Perhaps start with Yiro first. Perhaps just to ask you, what would be the sort of key piece of advice that you could give a developer to help develop in this space and help successful product development?
Yep, I think I can say with confidence that enterprises are looking for ways in which the existing data can be used for inventing new ways of working, new ways of operating, and I think we are in need of being able to make better use of data. So anything that you can do to facilitate that will be extremely helpful in reducing the barriers to IoT adoption.
Okay, thanks, Yiro. Kevin, the last point from you?
Yeah, I guess slightly different. I think MIPI is doing a lot, but we are very much a member-driven organization. And so if you're working on IoT designs, my takeaway is for you is get involved. We're always looking for ideas and innovation and how to really drive this market. And I think it's going to take the collaboration of all of us as members to do that.
Good point. Thanks, Kevin. And Michaeli.
Needs message developer will be that the data that is processed in the IoT is probably going to end up into the enterprise somewhere. So don't start to think, how people in enterprise think, that at the end of it, embedded is very easy to manipulate. So you need to take into account all these things, how this data would be managed and so on and processed. And last but not least, the security associated with it. What are the means you put to protect this data, the communication, to avoid disruption and all this kind of stuff. So it's also, this is an activity that we're also doing in MIPI. We're starting on the security, but this is also something that will need to grow to the MIPI focus area.
Okay, thanks, Michele. Absolutely, yeah, some really important points there. I'm sure we'll cover on the future DevCon. Okay, I think we need to fortunately close our session now. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I'd like to thank the panelists for their time and sharing their expertise with us today. Do very much appreciate it. It's a great session. Just like to remind you again, we have the MIPI IoT, Enabling the IoT Opportunity white paper. It's freely available on the MIPI website. Go download that, take a look. But that's it for MIPI DevCon 2020. I'd like to say thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.